Welcome, dear friends, to Mystic Bedtime Stories. I'm here with you tonight, as I am every evening, to guide you on a journey away from the hurried pace of the day and into a world where time moves like honey, slow and golden. Tonight, we travel together to a place where snow-capped mountains meet endless seas, where ancient spirits still whisper through pine forests, and where the heartbeat of a nearly forgotten people continues to echo through the ages. Close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of today's concerns melting away like morning frost under the gentle sun. Tonight's story will carry you across the Pacific, over vast blue waters to the northern reaches of Japan, to a land called Hokkaido. But this is not the Japan of neon lights and bustling cities. This is the Japan of endless winters, of sacred bears and silver salmon, of people who knew the names of every star and could read the language written in the patterns of frost on their windows. You see, every land has its secrets, its hidden stories that run deeper than what appears on any map. And in the far north of Japan, where the Sea of Okhotsk crashes against rocky shores and ancient forests stretch beyond the horizon, there lived a people called the Ainu. Their name simply means human in their own tongue. But they were so much more than this simple word suggests. They were the bridge between the world of spirits and the world of flesh, between the language of animals and the speech of mortals. The Ainu believed that every mountain, every river, every creature that walked or swam or flew was inhabited by kamui, divine spirits who had taken physical form to interact with humanity. In their worldview, every part of the natural world houses Ramat, spirits that connect all living things. Imagine that. Dear listener, a world where nothing is merely matter, where everything pulses with sacred life, where the wind through the trees is not just air moving, but the breath of ancient gods whispering secrets to those who know how to listen. Tonight, as you rest in whatever place you find yourself, I want you to feel that same sense of wonder that the Ainu carried in their hearts for thousands of years. I want you to imagine that the sounds around you, the settling of your house, the distant hum of traffic, even the beating of your own heart, are all part of an ancient conversation between the visible and invisible worlds. Our story tonight unfolds like a gentle snowfall, each moment settling softly upon the last, building into something beautiful and profound. We'll walk together through villages where smoke rises from conical houses made of wood and thatch, where grandmothers with intricate tattoos around their mouths tell stories that have been passed down through 40 generations. We'll sit by fires where hunters share the sacred meat of bears, believing that these great creatures have chosen to give their physical forms so that humans might survive the harsh winters, and that their spirits return to the mountain realm, honored and pleased by the reverence shown to their gift. This is not just a story about a people who lived long ago. The Ainu are still here, still breathing, still fighting to keep their ancient songs alive in a modern world. Today, they are working tirelessly to preserve their culture and language, turning to education and cultural preservation to pass their traditions to the next generation. Their story is one of loss and rediscovery, of silence and the courage to speak again, of traditions that were nearly buried under the weight of history, but now emerge like spring flowers through the last snow of winter. So settle deeper into your pillow now. Let your breathing slow and deepen. In a moment, I'll take you to Hokkaido in the time before steamships and railways, when the only sounds across the vast northern wilderness were the calls of cranes, the singing of whales in the icy straits, and the voices of the Ainu people, harmonizing with the wind as they have done since time immemorial. You'll smell the wood smoke from their fires, feel the soft fur of their winter clothing, taste the salmon they pull silver and gleaming from rivers that run so pure they mirror the sky like liquid crystal. This is your invitation to dream, not just with your mind tonight, but with your spirit, to feel the deep connection between human hearts and the wild world that has always been our truest home. The Ainu understood this connection so deeply that they never felt alone, even in the vast emptiness of winter nights, because they knew they were held in the loving attention of countless invisible beings who wished them well. And now, my dear friend, our journey begins. Let yourself sink into the story like sinking into a warm bath after a long day. Let the words carry you away from whatever troubles the day may have brought, and into a world where every breath is a prayer. Every sunrise is a miracle, and every human being is connected to something infinitely larger and more wonderful than they ever imagined. The snow is beginning to fall now in your mind's eye. Large, soft flakes that catch the last light of evening and transform the world into something magical. Can you see it? Can you feel the hush that comes over the land when snow begins to fall? This is how our story begins, in that sacred silence between day and night, between the known and the unknowable, between the world we think we understand and the world that has always been waiting for us to remember how to listen to its whispers. Welcome to the land of the Ainu, dear traveler. Welcome to a place where every ending is also a beginning, where every goodbye contains the seed of reunion, and where the ancient and eternal pulse of life beats steadily on, just beneath the surface of whatever we think we know about the world. Your journey into dreams begins now. Picture yourself standing on a cliff overlooking the northern sea. The wind carries salt and stories across miles of dark water that stretches to meet a sky the color of pewter. This is Hokkaido, in the time before maps gave it that name, when the Ainu people simply called it their home, their Mosir, the land that held all of life within its embrace. Below you, waves crash against black volcanic rocks, sending up sprays of foam that glisten like scattered pearls in the half-light of an autumn afternoon. Turn now and walk inland with me. Feel your feet sink slightly into the soft earth, cushioned by centuries of fallen leaves and pine needles. The forest closes around us like a living cathedral, its ceiling formed by interlacing branches of towering Todu fir trees and Shirokamba birches, whose white bark glows even in the dim forest light. This is not a gentle, cultivated woodland. This is wilderness in its purest form, ancient and untamed, where every tree has stood for longer than human memory, and where silence has a weight and presence all its own. The air here tastes different than anywhere else on earth. It carries the crispness of snow that never fully melts from the highest peaks, the green sweetness of moss growing thick on fallen logs, and underneath it all, the rich, dark scent of earth that has been composting its own abundance for millennia. Breathe deeply now, and imagine that every breath is cleaning something from your lungs that you didn't even know was there, replacing the stale air of modern life with something so pure it makes you dizzy with its clarity. As we walk deeper into this realm, notice how different sounds emerge from different directions. There, to your left, the hollow tapping of a woodpecker seeking insects in the bark of a massive pine. To your right, the rustle of some small creature, perhaps a Ezo squirrel, gathering nuts for the winter that always comes too soon in this northern land. And from somewhere far ahead, the haunting call of a tancho crane, that magnificent red-crowned bird that the Ainu considered a messenger between the earthly and divine realms. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about this forest is its silence. Not the empty silence of absence, but the full silence of deep presence. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't make you want to speak, but rather makes you want to listen more deeply than you've ever listened before. It's the silence that exists between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the moment you ask a question and the moment understanding arrives like dawn breaking over mountain peaks. This silence is where the Ainu learned to hear the voices of the Kamui, the divine spirits that inhabit every aspect of the natural world. In this profound quiet, they could distinguish between the voice of Chikap Kamui, the owl who brings messages from the spirit world, and Pikar Kamui, the water spirit who ensures the salmon return each spring. They learned that silence is not the absence of communication, but rather the medium through which the deepest truths travel. Feel yourself settling deeper into this forest silence now. Notice how your own heartbeat seems to slow to match the ancient rhythm of this place. The urgent thoughts of your day begin to fade like echoes that grow fainter with distance. Here, in this timeless woodland, the only time that matters is the eternal now, the single moment that contains all moments, stretching endlessly in every direction. Now imagine that the path beneath your feet begins to descend, winding through groves of Mizunara oak trees, whose leaves rustle with whispers of approaching winter. The air grows cooler as you descend, and soon you catch glimpses of water sparkling between the trees. This is one of Hokkaido's countless lakes, formed by ancient volcanic activity and fed by springs so pure they run like liquid crystal through veins of living rock. Lake Shikotsu lies before you now, its surface so still it might be polished obsidian. The lake is nearly circular, cradled in the arms of volcanic mountains whose reflections float on the water like ghostly doubles of the solid peaks above. This is sacred water, the Ainu knew, water that had traveled deep through the Earth's body, gathering minerals and memories from the planet's core before emerging into daylight, pure enough to reflect not just images, but souls. Along the shoreline, you notice the first signs of human presence, but these are not intrusions upon the landscape. They are gentle additions, harmonious notes added to a song that was already perfect. Here, a few shize, traditional Ainu houses, sit nestled among the trees like natural features of the terrain. Their walls are made of vertically placed logs, chinked with moss and mud, and their roofs are thick thatch that will shed rain and snow while providing homes for countless small creatures. Smoke rises straight up from their central hearths, carrying the scents of cooking fish and burning birchwood into the still air. Notice how these dwellings seem to grow from the earth itself, as if they were planted rather than built. There are no harsh angles, no materials that jar against the natural surroundings. Everything flows together in curves and organic shapes that echo the lines of hills and the meandering paths of streams. This is architecture that serves as meditation on the relationship between human need and natural abundance, between shelter and integration. The people who emerge from these houses move with the same organic grace as their buildings. Watch as an elderly Akashi, a grandfather, steps outside to tend a small fire where fish hang smoking on wooden racks. His movements are unhurried, each gesture purposeful and complete in itself. His clothing is made from materials the land itself has provided, deerskin softened with patient work, fiber woven from the inner bark of elm trees, fur from animals who gave their lives so that humans might survive the coming cold. This is autumn in the land of the Ainu, when the natural world prepares for its long sleep under snow and ice. But it is not a time of scarcity. It is a time of abundance so rich it takes your breath away. The forests are heavy with nuts and berries. The rivers run silver with salmon returning from their years in the ocean to spawn in the same waters where they were born. The mountains echo with the calls of deer and the powerful voices of brown bears preparing for hibernation. Everything here moves in cycles so ancient and reliable that the Ainu built their entire way of life around them. They knew that after abundance comes rest. After rest comes renewal. After renewal comes abundance again. They lived not in opposition to these cycles, but as conscious participants in them, taking only what they needed and giving back through ceremony, gratitude, and careful stewardship of the land that sustained them. Feel yourself becoming part of this rhythm now, dear listener. Let your breathing slow to match the patient pulse of this northern wilderness. Let the concerns that seemed so urgent this morning fade like morning mist touched by sunlight. Here, in this ancient landscape, you remember something your soul has always known, but your mind may have forgotten, that you belong to something infinitely larger and more enduring than the small world of human worries and plans. The sun is beginning to set now, painting the lake and surrounding peaks in shades of rose and gold that have no names in any human language. The first stars appear, not harsh and distant as they seem in city skies, but close and warm, like the eyes of beloved ancestors watching over their children with infinite patience and love. This is the world the Ainu called home for thousands upon thousands of years, a world where every dawn brought wonder, every sunset brought gratitude, and every night brought dreams that connected the sleeping soul to the vast web of life that holds all things in perfect balance. Tomorrow, we will meet the people who learn to live in such profound harmony with this magnificent landscape that they seemed to disappear into it, becoming as natural and essential as the mountains themselves. Long before memory, before the first human footprint marked the soft earth beside mountain streams, there was only the realm of the Kamui. Picture it now in your mind's eye, this place beyond place, this time before time. It shimmer like heat waves rising from summer stone, existing not quite in our world and not quite outside it, but in that mysterious space between dreaming and waking that your soul knows so well. In this divine realm lived beings of pure spirit who had never known the weight of flesh or the limitation of form. They moved like thoughts move, swift and borderless, their essence flowing like aurora across an endless sky. Among them was Kamui Fuchi, the grandmother goddess of the hearth, whose wisdom encompassed all the knowledge that mothers carry in their hearts, multiplied by eternity. Her hair was white as fresh snow and as soft as smoke, and her eyes held the deep knowing that comes only to those who have watched over countless generations of children. Kamui Fuchi looked down from the spirit realm and saw the beautiful but empty island that would one day be called Hokkaido. She saw its pristine lakes reflecting skies that no eyes had ever beheld, its forests growing in cathedral silence with no prayers rising between their branches, its rivers running to the sea with no songs to carry to the great waters. The land was perfect, but it was incomplete. It needed the warmth of human hearts to awaken its full potential for joy. And so the grandmother goddess began to weave the first human beings from moonbeams and morning mist, from the breath of sleeping bears and the dreams of migrating whales. She took starlight for their eyes, so they would always remember their connection to the heavens, and soil from sacred places for their bones, so they would never forget they belonged to the earth. But most importantly, she breathed into each of them a portion of her own divine spirit, so they would always be able to hear the voices of the Kamui speaking through wind and water, through the cry of birds and the rustle of leaves. The Ainu elders say that in those first days, humans and Kamui lived almost as equals, the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds as thin as the skin that forms on cooling milk. People could speak directly with bear spirits and salmon spirits, with the spirits of mountains and the spirits of storms. They understood that everything they saw with their eyes was only the outer garment of invisible beings who had chosen to take material form for the purpose of interaction and mutual blessing. When an Ainu hunter took the life of a deer, he knew he was receiving a gift from Yuk Kamui, the deer spirit, who had willingly shed his spiritual body into physical form so that human children might have meat to grow strong. The hunter would offer prayers and perform ceremonies to honor the deer spirit and ensure his safe return to the Kamui realm, where he would resume his eternal, joyful existence and perhaps choose to visit the human world again in a new physical form. Listen now to the story that Ainu grandmothers have whispered to their grandchildren for more generations than there are stars visible on the clearest winter night. In the beginning time, when the world was still soft like clay in the hands of the divine potter, there lived a beautiful goddess named Waka Ush Kamui, she who governs all the waters of the earth. Her hair flowed like rivers, her tears became the sacred hot springs, and her laughter bubbled up from deep wells to bring healing to all who drank. Waka Ush Kamui fell in love with the mortal world and chose to take human form to walk among the people she had grown to love. She became the first Ainu woman, and from her union with the spirit of the north wind came the first Ainu children. These children carried within their blood the memory of their divine mother, which is why the Ainu have always been able to find water in the driest seasons, why they could predict weather by the taste of morning dew, and why their prayers could call rain from cloudless skies. But perhaps the most beloved of all the Kamui was Kimun Kamui, the great brown bear whose massive form housed the gentlest and most generous of spirits. The Ainu believed that the bear Kamui loved human beings so much that he chose to clothe himself in physical form specifically to provide for their needs. His thick fur would become warm clothing, his meat would sustain families through harsh winters, and his fat would fuel lamps that pushed back the darkness during the longest nights of the year. Kimun Kamui was not just a provider, but a teacher and spiritual guide. Mothers would tell their children that when a bear appeared in dreams, it meant the Great Spirit was offering wisdom and protection. Hunters who encountered bears in the forest would speak to them respectfully, acknowledging the divine presence within the massive physical form. They understood that the bear chose the moment of his own physical death, surrendering his earthly body as a sacred gift, while his eternal spirit returned joyfully to the Kamui realm. As you rest here tonight, dear listener, imagine what it would feel like to live in such a world where every creature you meet is both exactly what it appears to be and infinitely more than what your eyes can perceive. Where every rock and tree and flowing stream is inhabited by a conscious presence that wishes you well, that celebrates your existence, that sees your truest self and loves what it sees without reservation or condition. The Ainu lived in this kind of world for thousands of years. They never felt alone because they knew they were constantly surrounded by benevolent spirits who took joy in their joy and offered comfort in their sorrows. They never felt separate from nature because they understood themselves to be woven into the same divine fabric as everything else that exists. They never despaired about death because they knew it was simply the moment when their own spirits would shed their physical clothing and return to the eternal realm of the Kamui, from which they might choose to visit the mortal world again in new forms. This understanding shaped everything about how the Ainu lived. They developed elaborate ceremonies for welcoming spirits into the physical world and for bidding them safe journey when they departed back to the spirit realm. They created art that honored the divine presence within natural forms, patterns that seemed to capture the very essence of flowing water and dancing flame. Their music echoed the songs that the Kamui themselves were believed to sing in the realm beyond ordinary hearing. Most remarkably, they developed a way of being in the world that was simultaneously humble and confident, recognizing themselves as beloved children of divine beings while also understanding their responsibility as caretakers of the physical realm where spirits chose to manifest. They saw themselves as bridges between heaven and earth, translators between the language of spirit and the needs of flesh and blood. In this worldview, nothing was ever truly lost because everything was part of an eternal cycle of spiritual manifestation and return. The salmon who gave their bodies to feed Ainu families returned as spirits to the realm of Shishamo Kamui, the salmon deity, where they lived in joy until they chose to manifest again in physical form. The trees that provided wood for houses and boats returned as spirits to the court of Chikuni Kamui, the elm tree deity, where they danced in eternal forests of pure spirit. Even humans, when their time in physical form was complete, simply stepped out of their earthly bodies like taking off winter clothing when spring arrives. They joined the great community of Kamui, where they could watch over and guide the generations that followed them, sometimes appearing in dreams or sending signs through the behavior of animals and the patterns of weather. Tonight, as you prepare for your own journey into dreams, remember that the Ainu saw sleep itself as a form of temporary return to the spirit realm. In dreams, they believed, humans could visit the Kamui world directly, receiving teachings and prophecies, healing and blessing. Your dreams tonight might carry echoes of this ancient understanding, gentle reminders that you too are more than just your physical form, that you too have access to wisdom and peace that exists beyond the boundaries of ordinary waking consciousness. The stories of the Kamui continue to whisper through the northern forests, carried on winds that have blown across Hokkaido since the world was young. Tomorrow, we will explore the beautiful language the Ainu created to speak with both human and spirit beings, and the intricate ceremonies they developed to maintain harmony between all the different forms of life that share this mysterious and magnificent world. There are sounds in this world, dear listener, that exist nowhere else on earth. Sounds that were born from the marriage of human breath and the ancient winds of Hokkaido, syllables that carry within them the essence of salmon leaping upstream and bears emerging from winter caves. Tonight, let me share with you the music of the Ainu language, words that taste of snow and smell of wood smoke, phrases that were created not just to communicate between people, but to speak directly with the Kamui themselves. Ainu Itak, they called their language, which simply means human words. But these were words unlike any others spoken on earth. When linguists first encountered the Ainu language, they discovered something remarkable and heartbreaking. It belonged to no known language family. It stood alone, unique as a snowflake, connected to no other tongue spoken by any other people. It was as if the Kamui had breathed into the first Ainu people. not just life, but a completely original way of giving voice to that life. Listen to how the Ainu spoke of water, waka for the sacred liquid itself, but waka us for a small stream, nay for a larger creek, and pet for the great rivers that carry salmon home to spawn. They had a word, kotan, that meant not just village, but the perfect harmony between human settlement and natural landscape. When they said kotan, they meant a place where people lived so gently upon the earth that deer would drink at the edges of their gardens and birds would nest in the eaves of their houses without fear. For fire, that most essential element of human survival, they had Abe, but they also had Ape Fushi, which meant the grandmother spirit of the hearth fire, the divine presence that lived within every flame and kept families warm through the endless winter nights. Every important concept in their world had layers of meaning, like light filtering through forest leaves, each layer revealing new depths of understanding. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Ainu Itak was how it reflected the Ainu understanding that all beings, human and otherwise, possessed consciousness and deserved respectful address. They had specific ways of speaking to different animals, honorific terms for addressing the spirits of trees and rocks and streams. When an Ainu hunter spoke to a deer, he used grammatical structures that acknowledged the deer as an equal being, a fellow child of the Kamui who happened to wear a different physical form. The language was filled with what linguists call evidentiality markers, words that indicated how the speaker knew what they were saying. There was one set of verb endings for things they had experienced directly, another for things they had been told by trusted elders, and yet another for things they knew through dreams or spiritual revelation. Truth in the Ainu world came from many different sources, and their language honored all of them. Imagine, if you will, speaking a language where every sentence acknowledged the mystery of existence, where you couldn't make a simple statement like, "It's raining," without also indicating whether you knew this because you felt the drops on your skin, or because you heard them on the roof, or because the spirits of the storm had whispered it to you in a dream. This was a language that refused to pretend the world was simple or that human knowledge was ever complete. Yukar were the epic poems of the Ainu, stories so long they could take days to recite in their entirety. These were not just entertainment, but living repositories of cultural wisdom, genealogies of both human families and Kamui lineages, maps of the spiritual landscape that overlaid the physical terrain of Hokkaido. The yukar were always chanted, never simply spoken, their rhythms matching the pace of traditional dances, their melodies echoing the calls of cranes and the songs of whales. The most famous of these epics tells the story of Ainu Rakur, the Ainu hero who could transform himself into different animals to complete impossible tasks. In one adventure, he becomes a salmon to swim to the bottom of the deepest lake and retrieve the tears of the water goddess, which had the power to heal any illness. In another, he takes the form of a golden eagle to carry messages between the human world and the realm of the Kamui, negotiating treaties of mutual respect between species. These stories were more than entertainment. They were instruction manuals for living in harmony with the complex web of relationships that connected all forms of life. Every yukar contained layers of practical wisdom about hunting, fishing, gathering, and healing, but wrapped in narratives so compelling that listeners would find themselves transported beyond the ordinary world into realms where anything was possible for those who maintained proper relationships with the Kamui. The tragedy of the Ainu language is also its miracle. By the middle of the 20th century, fewer and fewer children were learning Ainu Itak as their mother tongue. The pressures of modernization, the policies of cultural assimilation, and the simple practical need to speak Japanese in order to survive in the changing world meant that this unique and beautiful language began to fade like evening light, leaving the sky. But languages are living things, and like all living things, they have a remarkable capacity for regeneration when they are tended with love and dedication. In recent decades, Ainu communities have undertaken heroic efforts to document, preserve, and revitalize their ancestral tongue. Elders who still remembered the old words worked with linguists to create dictionaries and grammars. Young people began gathering to learn songs and stories that their great-grandparents had known by heart. There's something deeply moving about watching a young person learn to speak a language that connects them not just to their ancestors, but to a completely different way of experiencing the world. When they learn to say Iran Karapte, which means both hello and let me gently touch your heart, they are learning more than vocabulary. They are learning that language itself can be an act of blessing, that every conversation can be an opportunity to offer kindness to another being. Today, you can hear children in Ainu cultural centers learning to count in their ancestral language. Sign, 2, Ri, Ein, Ashikni, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Simple numbers, but carrying within their sounds the breath of ancestors who used these same words to count salmon in the nets, stars in the winter sky, years of a child's growth toward adulthood. Language shapes not just how we communicate, but how we think, how we perceive, how we understand our place in the vast web of existence. The Ainu language taught its speakers to live in a world where everything was alive, where everything had consciousness, where every word spoken was heard not just by human ears, but by the countless invisible presences that surround us always. When the Ainu said kamui, they weren't just using a word that could be translated as God or spirit. They were invoking a relationship, acknowledging a presence, participating in a conversation that had been going on since the beginning of time and would continue long after their own voices fell silent. Every utterance of that word was both a prayer and a recognition, both a greeting and an offering. As you settle deeper into rest tonight, let the sounds of these ancient words wash over you like gentle waves. Kamui, Kotan, Iran Karapte. Let them carry you into dreams where language is not a barrier between beings but a bridge, where every word spoken creates connection rather than separation, where the very act of naming something is an expression of love and reverence. The Ainu understood that words have power, that language is not neutral but creative, that every time we speak, we are participating in the ongoing creation of the world. They chose their words carefully, knowing that careless speech could disturb the delicate harmony between the human and more than human worlds, while thoughtful words could strengthen the bonds that hold all life together in mutual support and blessing. In your dreams tonight, you might find yourself understanding languages you've never studied, communicating with beings who speak in colors or fragrances or the feeling of wind on skin. This, too, is part of the Ainu legacy, the understanding that communication transcends the boundaries we normally think constrain it, that consciousness seeks connection through whatever means are available, that the urge to reach out and touch another mind is universal and sacred. Next, we will enter the daily world of the Ainu people, exploring the rhythms of their everyday life, the way they transformed the simple acts of cooking and cleaning and caring for children into expressions of spiritual practice and community blessing. Come with me now into the heart of an Ainu home, where the day begins not with alarms or schedules, but with the gentle stirring of embers in the sacred hearth. It is early morning in a traditional chisei, and the first light of dawn filters through small windows, casting golden patterns on walls made smooth by generations of careful tending. The air smells of wood smoke and dried fish, of herbs hanging from the rafters and the sweet grass that has been woven into the walls themselves. The cheese is more than just a dwelling. It is a living prayer made of wood and thatch and human intention. Picture it clearly in your mind. A rectangular structure about 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, its framework constructed entirely without nails, held together by the patient skill of builders who understood that flexibility creates stronger bonds than rigid connection. The walls rise in gentle curves, their surfaces covered with vertical planks of to-do fir that have been split by hand and fitted together so precisely that no winter wind can find its way through the joints. But most remarkable is the roof, a thick blanket of susu grass thatch that slopes down almost to the ground on all sides. This living roof breathes with the seasons, swelling tight against rain, shedding snow in gentle cascades, and providing homes for countless small creatures who become part of the household's extended family. Birds nest in its eaves, mice tunnel through its layers, and in spring, tiny flowers sometimes bloom from seeds that have found their way into the thatch, turning the house itself into a garden. At the center of this nurturing space burns the abeita, the sacred hearth that is never allowed to die completely. Around it, the family gathers as they have gathered for countless generations. 3 generations sometimes sharing this single warm space. Grandparents whose faces map the wisdom of decades, parents in the full strength of their middle years, and children whose bright eyes reflect the flames like mirrors of pure possibility. Watch as the grandmother, the husi, rises first in the pre-dawn darkness. Her movements are slow and deliberate, not from age, but from reverence, for she understands that every action of the day is an opportunity to express gratitude to the kamui who have provided for her family's needs. She kneels beside the hearth and breathes gently on the glowing coals, offering a whispered prayer to Abfuchi, the fire goddess, asking for her continued blessing on the household. The fire awakens like a sleepy child, stretching flames upward toward the smoke hole in the center of the roof. Soon the kettle begins to sing, a sound that has announced the beginning of countless Ainu days. The water heating in that kettle comes from a spring the family has used for generations, carried home in containers made from birch bark sewn with sinew from deer who gave their lives to provide not just meat, but materials for the tools of daily living. The huchi prepares the morning meal with the same careful attention she gives to ceremony. She takes dried salmon from bundles hanging near the ceiling. Fish that were caught during the autumn runs when the rivers ran silver with returning spawners. These salmon chose to give their bodies so that human families might survive the winter, and their gift is honored by being received with gratitude and prepared with skill that wastes nothing. As the fish cooks over the sacred fire, its aroma fills the cheese like incense, and family members begin to stir from their sleeping places around the walls. The children sleep on soft mats made from woven grass, covered with robes sewn from the fur of rabbits and foxes who have returned to the kamui world after clothing human bodies through cold northern nights. Even in sleep, the Ainu are held by the gifts of other beings, surrounded by the generosity of a world that provides abundantly for those who know how to receive with proper gratitude. The father, the Akashi, rises and performs his own morning devotions, offering prayers to Nusak or Kamui, the treasure-holding deity who watches over the family's welfare. He takes from a special box carved from a single piece of elm wood the family's most sacred possessions. Ainu, prayer sticks carved from willow branches and shaved into delicate curls that hold the intentions of human hearts and carry them to the realm of the kamui. The morning tasks divide naturally between family members, each person contributing their particular gifts to the harmony of the household. The women tend the fire, prepare food, and work on the endless tasks of creating clothing and household items from the materials the land provides. Their fingers are never idle, always weaving grass into baskets, sewing skins into garments, or decorating everyday objects with intricate patterns that tell stories and invoke protection. The men prepare for the day's work of hunting, fishing, or gathering, checking their tools and offering prayers to the kamui, who govern their particular activities. An Ainu hunter never simply takes his bow and arrows and walks into the forest. He first purifies himself with smoke from sacred plants, asks permission from the spirits of the animals he hopes to encounter, and promises to use every part of any creature that chooses to give its life for the sustenance of his family. But perhaps the most important activity of any Ainu morning is the education of children. Though this learning bears no resemblance to formal schooling as we understand it today. Children learn by watching, by listening, by participating in the daily activities that sustain life. A 5-year-old girl sits beside her mother, learning to distinguish between different types of grass suitable for weaving. A 7-year-old boy accompanies his father to check fish traps, learning to read the signs that indicate where salmon are running. This is education through immersion in a living culture, where every skill necessary for survival is also an art form, where every practical activity is also a spiritual practice. The children learn that cutting patterns for new clothing requires not just technical skill, but the ability to see the hidden beauty in raw materials. They discover that successful hunting depends not just on physical prowess, but on maintaining proper relationships with the spirits of the animals they seek. In the Ainu world, there is no separation between work and worship, between practical necessity and spiritual practice. When the women gather in the afternoon to work on their sewing, their conversation flows between everyday concerns and sacred stories, between gossip about neighbors and discussions of dreams that may have brought messages from the kamui. Their needles flash in and out of deerskin and cloth in patterns that seem to dance, creating garments that are both functional protection against harsh weather and artistic expressions of their maker's understanding of beauty. The men, too, find the sacred within the mundane. When they repair nets or carve new tools, their hands move in rhythms learned from fathers and grandfathers, patterns of movement that connect them to ancestral wisdom while adapting to present needs. Every knot tied in a fishing net is an expression of hope that the salmon kamui will continue to visit the human world in physical form. Every stroke of the carving knife is a prayer for harmony between human need and natural abundance. As evening approaches, the pace of activity in the chise begins to slow, but the sense of connection and purpose only deepens. The family gathers around the hearth for the evening meal, and this is when the day's experiences are shared and woven into the larger story of the community's life. Children tell their parents what they observed while playing in the forest. Adults share news from their interactions with neighbors or their encounters with animals during the day's work. The food they share represents the generosity of countless beings. Root vegetables that grew in gardens tended with songs to encourage their growth. Fish that chose to enter the family's nets. Wild plants gathered from mountainsides where they grow according to their own ancient wisdom. Each bite is in communion, not just with the physical substance of nourishment, but with the spiritual intentions of the beings who provided it. After the meal, as darkness settles over the land outside, the chise becomes a world unto itself, warm and secure in the embrace of thick walls and living roof. This is when stories emerge, when the wisdom of generations is passed from old voices to young ears, when the events of ordinary days are placed into the context of eternal patterns that connect all Ainu families to the great ongoing story of their people. The fire burns lower now, its flames casting dancing shadows on faces that reflect both the practical satisfaction of a day's work completed and the deeper contentment that comes from living in harmony with forces larger than individual will. Outside, snow may be falling or wind may be stirring the trees, but inside the cheese, human beings rest in the knowledge that they are held safely within a web of relationships that includes not just their human family, but the countless invisible presences who share their world and wish them well. This is how the Ainu lived for thousands of years, finding the extraordinary within the ordinary, the sacred within the mundane, the eternal within the rhythms of daily survival. Their homes were temples, their meals were communion ceremonies, their work was worship, and their families were congregations united not just by blood, but by shared commitment to maintaining balance between the human and more than human worlds. Tonight, as you prepare for your own rest, remember that you too live within rhythms older than civilization, that your own daily routines can become expressions of gratitude and connection if you approach them with the kind of reverence the Ainu brought to every moment of their lives. Next, we will explore the great ceremonies that marked the turning points of Ainu life, rituals that transformed individual passages into community celebrations and personal growth into spiritual teaching for all who witnessed. For centuries beyond counting, the rhythm of Ainu life flowed like the seasonal migrations of salmon, predictable and eternal, shaped by forces as ancient as the mountains themselves. But all rivers eventually reach the sea, and all isolated worlds eventually encounter the larger currents of history. The meeting between the Ainu and the Japanese people would prove to be one of those watershed moments that divides time into before and after, transforming not just individual lives, but the very nature of what it meant to be human in the Northern Islands. Picture, if you will, the first moment when an Ainu hunter, tracking deer through the southern forests of what would later be called Hokkaido, caught sight of something that should not have been there. A boat, perhaps, but unlike any vessel his people had ever constructed, with white cloth stretched between tall wooden poles, moving across the water without paddles, as if pushed by invisible spirits. Or perhaps it was smoke rising from a campfire in a location where no kotan had ever been established, carrying the scent of unfamiliar foods being prepared according to unknown customs. These first encounters, occurring sometime in the 15th century, must have felt to both peoples like meetings between inhabitants of different worlds. The Japanese traders and explorers who ventured north brought with them technologies and concepts that had no equivalent in Ainu experience, metal tools that held edges sharper and longer than anything made from stone, woven cloth dyed in colors that seemed to capture the essence of flowers that bloomed nowhere in the northern wilderness, and most remarkably, systems of marking meaning on flat surfaces that could carry messages across vast distances without requiring human memory to preserve them. For their part, the Japanese encountered a people whose mastery of survival in harsh northern conditions bordered on the magical. The Ainu could predict weather patterns with an accuracy that seemed supernatural, navigate trackless forests as if following invisible roads, and maintain health and vitality through winters that would have killed southern peoples in a matter of weeks. They possessed knowledge of plants and their properties that had been refined over millennia, understanding of animal behavior that allowed them to hunt successfully while maintaining sustainable populations, and spiritual practices that created communities of remarkable harmony and resilience. In those early centuries of contact, trade flowed between the two peoples like water finding its natural course. The Ainu offered furs of extraordinary quality, particularly the thick pelts of brown bears and the silver-gray skins of seals, materials that commanded high prices in the markets of southern Japan and beyond. They provided salmon oil that burned with a clean, bright flame, and dried fish that could sustain travelers on long journeys. Most prized of all were the eagle feathers that played such important roles in Ainu ceremony, feathers that the Japanese nobility coveted for their own rituals and decorations. In return, the Japanese brought iron tools that revolutionized certain aspects of Ainu life. Metal knives made food preparation more efficient. Iron fishhooks increased the success of fishing expeditions, and metal cooking pots allowed for new methods of preparing meals. They also brought rice, a grain unknown in the northern climate, along with sake, lacquered bowls, and textiles woven from silk and cotton that the Ainu incorporated into their traditional clothing, creating new forms of beauty that blended elements from both cultures. But perhaps the most profound exchanges were not of material goods, but of ideas and ways of seeing the world. Some Japanese who spent extended time among the Ainu were deeply moved by their hosts' relationship with the natural world, by their ability to live in abundance without depleting the sources of that abundance. They recorded observations about Ainu hunting practices that ensured animal populations remained healthy, about agricultural techniques that improved soil rather than exhausting it, and about social customs that maintained harmony within communities across generations. Similarly, some Ainu began to adopt certain Japanese practices that seemed to offer practical advantages or aesthetic pleasures. They learned new methods of food preservation, new designs for clothing and household items, and new forms of artistic expression that could be integrated with their traditional arts. For several centuries, this cultural exchange enriched both peoples, creating hybrid forms of beauty and wisdom that neither could have developed in isolation. But as the centuries passed, the nature of contact began to change in ways that would ultimately prove catastrophic for the Ainu way of life. What had begun as voluntary trade between equals gradually shifted toward a more exploitative relationship as Japanese political and economic power grew and consolidated. The Tokugawa shogunate, seeking to extend its control over all the territories it considered part of Japan, began to view Hokkaido not as the homeland of an independent people, but as a frontier region to be colonized and developed according to Japanese interests. The Matsumai Han, the feudal domain granted authority over Hokkaido trade, instituted policies that gave them monopolistic control over commerce with the Ainu. No longer could Ainu communities trade freely with whoever offered the best terms. Instead, they were required to conduct all business through Japanese intermediaries, who often paid unfairly low prices for Ainu goods, while charging inflated prices for Japanese products. This system, designed to extract maximum profit from Ainu labor while providing minimum compensation, began to undermine the economic foundation of traditional Ainu life. More devastating still was the gradual restriction of Ainu access to the lands and waters that had sustained their ancestors for millennia. Traditional hunting and fishing grounds were declared off-limits to their original inhabitants, reserved instead for Japanese colonists who often lacked the knowledge to use these resources sustainably. Sacred sites where the Ainu had conducted ceremonies for countless generations were sometimes destroyed to make way for Japanese settlements, or converted to uses that violated everything the Ainu considered sacred. The culmination of these mounting pressures came with the Meiji Restoration of 1868, when Japan embarked on a program of rapid modernization that included the systematic assimilation of all minority peoples within its borders. The Hokkaido Colonization Office was established with the explicit goal of transforming Hokkaido into a productive agricultural region populated by Japanese settlers. In pursuit of this vision, Ainu people were forbidden to practice many of their traditional customs, required to adopt Japanese names, and often relocated from ancestral lands to marginal areas where traditional subsistence practices were impossible. Imagine what it meant for an Ainu child in the late 19th century to grow up in a world where speaking your mother's language could result in punishment, where practicing the ceremonies your grandparents considered essential for spiritual health was forbidden by law, where the foods your people had eaten for thousands of years were replaced by unfamiliar crops that often failed to grow properly in northern soil. These children found themselves caught between worlds, no longer able to fully participate in traditional Ainu culture, but never fully accepted as equals in Japanese society. They watched their grandparents struggle to maintain cultural practices in secret, seen elders who had once been respected community leaders reduced to poverty and marginalization. They experienced the profound disorientation that comes from having your people's entire way of understanding the world declared primitive and backward by the dominant culture. Yet even in these darkest times, the essential spirit of the Ainu people proved remarkably resilient. In hidden corners of their communities, grandmothers continued to teach traditional songs to grandchildren, passing them down like precious seeds that might someday find fertile ground in which to grow again. Fathers taught sons the proper way to carve inao prayer sticks, even though the ceremonies for which they were intended could no longer be performed openly. Mothers showed daughters the intricate patterns of traditional embroidery, preserving in thread and imagination the artistic heritage that connected them to countless generations of ancestors. Some Ainu individuals found ways to navigate the changing world while maintaining connections to their cultural roots. They learned Japanese customs and language well enough to succeed in the new economic system, but used their success to support family members and community elders who struggled with the transition. They became bridges between worlds, translating not just language, but cultural concepts, helping their own people understand the new reality, while also educating sympathetic Japanese about the value of Ainu traditions. Others chose resistance, maintaining traditional practices despite legal prohibitions, creating underground networks that preserved cultural knowledge and passed it to new generations. They understood that cultural extinction would be a form of death more complete than physical death, erasing not just their own lives, but the accumulated wisdom of their ancestors and the potential contributions they might make to future generations. The story of contact between the Ainu and Japanese peoples reflects patterns that have been repeated countless times throughout human history. Whenever expanding civilizations encounter indigenous communities, it is a story that contains elements of mutual enrichment and cultural exchange, but also exploitation, displacement, and cultural suppression. It reminds us that the meeting of different worlds can produce either creative synthesis or destructive domination, depending on the intentions and power relationships of those involved. As we sit here tonight in the comfort of our own homes, perhaps we can imagine the Ainu families who gathered around their hearth fires during those difficult years, wondering what the future would hold for their children and their children's children. They must have asked themselves whether it was better to cling to traditional ways that seemed increasingly impossible to maintain, or to embrace change that promised survival, but at the cost of everything that had once given life meaning. These were not abstract philosophical questions, but immediate practical dilemmas that affected every aspect of daily life. Should children be taught traditional skills that might no longer be useful in the modern world, or modern skills that would help them succeed but disconnect them from their heritage? Should families remain in traditional territories where they faced increasing restrictions and poverty, or relocate to areas where economic opportunities existed but cultural connections would be severed? The choices made by Ainu individuals and families during this period of upheaval would shape the future of their culture in ways that are still unfolding today. Some traditions were lost forever, their last practitioners taking invaluable knowledge to their graves. Other traditions went underground, preserved in secret, until times when they could again be practiced openly. Still others adapted and evolved, taking new forms that maintained essential spiritual meanings while expressing them through contemporary means. The story of this cultural transformation is not one of simple loss or simple survival, but of the complex process by which human communities respond to existential challenges. It is a story that speaks to anyone who has ever felt caught between competing loyalties, anyone who has had to choose between honoring the past and embracing an uncertain future, anyone who has wondered how to maintain authentic identity in a world that seems to reward conformity over distinctiveness. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you might find yourself dreaming of those Ainu families gathered around their fires during the long winters of cultural transition, drawing strength from ancient stories while facing unprecedented challenges. In your dreams, you might hear the voices of children learning forbidden songs from grandparents who risked punishment to keep cultural memory alive, or see the hands of women creating traditional crafts that would preserve artistic knowledge for future generations, who might someday have the freedom to practice it openly again. These dreams remind us that cultural survival depends not just on political or economic conditions, but on the willingness of individuals to carry forward the essential wisdom of their people, even when doing so requires great personal sacrifice. The Ainu who maintained their traditions during the darkest periods of suppression were planting seeds that would eventually bloom into the cultural revival movements of later generations. Next, we will hear the voices of the last traditional speakers, the elders who served as living bridges between the ancient world and the modern one, carrying in their memories the songs and stories and ceremonial knowledge that would either die with them or be passed on to younger generations hungry to reconnect with their roots. In the small hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and morning, there are voices that speak from the edges of memory itself. These are the voices of the Akashi and Huchi, the grandfathers and grandmothers who were born when the old ways still lived in daily practice, who learned their first words in Ainu Itak from parents who had never spoken any other language, who carried within their aging bodies the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human experience in harmony with the northern wilderness. Picture an old woman sitting beside a low fire in the gathering dusk of a winter evening. Her hair is white as fresh snow, braided with careful attention and pinned with ornaments carved from wood that grew in forests her great-grandmother knew as a child. Around her mouth, faint blue lines mark the remains of traditional tattoos that were forbidden before she reached the age to receive them in their full ceremonial form. Her hands, weathered by decades of work but still nimble, move constantly as she speaks, shaping meaning in the air with gestures that have accompanied Ainu storytelling since time beyond memory. Her name is Ekaterina, though her Ainu name, whispered only among family, means she who remembers the songs of water. She is speaking to her granddaughter, a young woman whose education has been conducted entirely in Japanese, who must concentrate intently to understand the ancient words that flow from her grandmother's lips like water from a mountain spring. Between them lies a gap of more than language, a chasm that spans the distance between two entirely different ways of being human. Kamui are everywhere, the old woman says, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has spent a lifetime listening to presences that most modern people no longer hear. When I was small, my mother taught me to greet the spirit of each new day before I spoke to any human being. She showed me how to offer the first sip of morning tea to Abe Fushi, the fire goddess, and how to save the last bite of evening meal for the spirits of our ancestors who still gather around the hearth to watch over their descendants. The granddaughter listens with the hunger of someone discovering water after long thirst. She has grown up in a world where such beliefs are dismissed as superstition, where success is measured by the ability to master technologies and economic systems that have no room for conversations with invisible beings. Yet something in her grandmother's voice, something in the old woman's absolute conviction, and the peace that seems to radiate from her presence, suggests that perhaps the modern world has discarded wisdom it can ill afford to lose. "Tell me about the bear ceremony," the young woman asks, using her careful, school-learned Japanese because she lacks the Ainu vocabulary for the concepts she wants to understand. The old woman's face lights up with a joy so pure it seems to illuminate the dim room, and she begins to speak in Ainu Itak, the words flowing with a music and rhythm that no translation could capture. She tells of Iomante, the ceremony of sending the spirit of a bear back to the Kamui world, a ritual so complex and profound that it required an entire community's participation and could last for days. She describes how young bears were sometimes raised from cubs within Ainu households, treated not as pets, but as honored guests from the spirit realm who had chosen to take physical form so they could participate in this sacred exchange between human and divine worlds. "The bear Kamui loves us so much," the old woman explains, "that he clothes himself in physical form specifically to provide for our needs. His fur becomes our warmth, his meat becomes our strength, his fat becomes the light that guides us through winter darkness. But most important of all, his presence teaches us humility, reminds us that we are not the masters of this world, but participants in a great community of beings who care for each other across the boundaries of species and the barriers between visible and invisible realms." The Iomante ceremony, she continues, was designed to honor this extraordinary gift while ensuring that the bear spirit returned to the Kamui world with joy rather than resentment, carrying with him stories of how beautifully he had been received by human families, how his sacrifice had been appreciated, how his spiritual essence had been celebrated with dancing and singing and elaborate feasts that lasted until dawn painted the eastern sky. But as she speaks, shadows of sadness cross the old woman's face like clouds moving across the moon. These ceremonies have not been performed in their full traditional form for decades. The knowledge required to conduct them properly exists now only in the memories of elders like herself, and even that knowledge is incomplete, fragmented by the disruptions of cultural suppression and the deaths of master practitioners who took crucial details to their graves. "I remember fragments," she admits, her voice growing smaller, more fragile. "I remember some of the songs, some of the prayers, some of the proper ways of preparing inao and offering them to the kamui. But there were aspects of the ceremonies that only the Akashi knew, secrets passed from grandfather to grandson that were never shared with women or children. When the old men died without passing on this knowledge, pieces of our spiritual practice died with them. This is the tragic mathematics of cultural extinction, dear listener. Knowledge that took millennia to develop can disappear in a single generation if the chain of transmission is broken. Skills that once seemed as permanent as mountains can vanish like morning mist when the social structures that supported them are dismantled. Languages that carried the accumulated wisdom of entire peoples can fall silent when economic and political pressures make it impractical for parents to pass them on to their children. Yet even in this recognition of loss, there is something remarkable about these elders, something that transcends the sadness of their situation. They possess a quality of presence, a depth of being that seems to come from their lifelong practice of living in conscious relationship with forces larger than individual will. They have known what it feels like to be held by a community that includes not just human beings, but plants and animals and spirits and ancestors, all working together to maintain the delicate balance that allows life to flourish. And perhaps, most remarkably, many of these elders chose to spend their final years not in bitterness about what had been lost, but in dedication to preserving whatever could still be saved. They worked with researchers and younger community members to document traditional songs, to record stories that had been passed down through oral tradition, to demonstrate crafts and techniques that were in danger of disappearing forever. Ekaterina is one of these cultural guardians. Despite her advanced age and the isolation that comes from being one of the last fluent speakers of her language, she spends her days teaching anyone willing to learn. She shows young people how to identify edible and medicinal plants, how to read weather patterns in the behavior of animals, how to maintain spiritual balance through daily practices of gratitude and reverence. Sometimes, late at night when sleep eludes her, she finds herself speaking to empty rooms in the language of her childhood, keeping the words alive through use even when there is no one left to understand them. She recites prayers and stories and songs that her own grandmother taught her, her voice the only thing standing between these ancient expressions of human wisdom and complete silence. But perhaps most importantly, she continues to live according to the principles that guided her ancestors, maintaining the inner practices that connected the Ainu to their spiritual understanding of the world. Each morning, she still greets the day with prayers of gratitude. Each evening, she still offers thanks for the gifts that have sustained her through another day of life. She still speaks to the kamui as if they were dear friends, because for her, they are. In your dreams tonight, you might encounter such an elder, someone whose presence carries the accumulated wisdom of generations, whose words seem to come from a depth of understanding that our hurried modern world rarely allows us to develop. In that dream meeting, you might discover that age and loss have refined this person's being into something luminous, that the approaching end of their individual life has somehow intensified their connection to the eternal patterns that connect all life across time and space. These elders remind us that cultural knowledge is not just information stored in books or museums, but living wisdom embodied in human beings who have spent their entire lives practicing ways of being that took countless generations to develop. When such people leave this world, something irreplaceable departs with them, but they also leave behind seeds of understanding that can take root in receptive hearts and grow into new forms of ancient wisdom. The voices of the last traditional speakers echo now across the mountains and forests of Hokkaido, carried on winds that have blown across these lands since the world was young, searching perhaps for ears young enough to hear them clearly and hearts open enough to receive the gifts they still have to offer. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift deeper into this ancient world, where the boundary between the seen and unseen grows thin as morning mist. Here, in the heart of Hokkaido's winter embrace, something profound stirs in the crystalline air. The Ainu people understood what we have forgotten in our hurried modern lives, that the earth itself breathes, that mountains hold memory, and that the ocean carries the whispered prayers of countless generations. Picture yourself standing now at the edge of a pristine lake, its surface mirror still beneath the weight of winter silence. The water is so clear, you can see smooth stones resting on the bottom, each one worn smooth by centuries of gentle currents. This is not merely water, the Ainu would tell you. This is the dwelling place of Nutop Kamui, the spirit deity of lakes and marshes, whose presence ensures that fresh water flows freely for all who need it. Listen carefully, and you might hear the softest rippling, like liquid music played on invisible strings. The mountains rise around you in majestic silence, their peaks crowned with snow that catches the pale winter light like scattered diamonds. These are not simply geological formations to the Ainu mind. Each mountain holds within its stone heart a kamui, a spirit deity whose presence can be felt in the way shadows fall across the slopes, in the particular quality of wind that flows down rocky faces. Mount Daisetsu towers above all others, its name meaning Great Snow Mountain, and the Ainu knew it as a sacred gathering place where the kamui of different mountains would come together to share wisdom and watch over the land below. Breathe in the thin, sharp air, so clean it seems to cleanse your very thoughts. The Ainu believed that with each breath, you were sharing life force with the spirits around you. The trees exhale what you need, and you return the favor, an endless cycle of giving and receiving that connects all living things in an intricate web of mutual dependence and respect. In the distance, you hear the ocean calling, its voice carrying across the snow-covered forests like the memory of summer storms. The sea speaks in many languages. Sometimes it whispers like a mother comforting her child. Sometimes it roars with the authority of ancient gods, sharing timeless truths. To the Ainu, the ocean was not a barrier, but a highway, connecting their homeland to distant shores where related spirits dwelled. They understood that rivers were the ocean's children, climbing inland to bring gifts of salmon and stories from the deep waters. As you walk deeper into this sacred landscape, your footsteps crunching softly in the snow, you begin to sense the presence that surrounds you. It's not quite sound, not quite sensation, but something that registers in that deep part of your consciousness where dreams are born. The kamui are near, these spirit deities who inhabit every aspect of the natural world. They are not distant gods dwelling in unreachable heavens, but intimate companions who share your daily existence, who notice when you show respect, who respond to gratitude with abundance and care. A raven calls from high in a snow-laden pine, and the Ainu would recognize this as Pashkur Kamui, the crow deity, bringing messages between the world of spirits and the world of humans. Listen to that call, how it echoes off the mountain faces and seems to wake something ancient in the forest depths. Each animal, each plant, each feature of the landscape holds its own spirit, its own consciousness, its own role in the great symphony of existence. The wind picks up now, sighing through the pine boughs with a sound like distant singing. This is the voice of Rera Kamui, the wind deity, carrying prayers from one end of the island to the other, mixing the scents of forest and sea, mountain and valley, creating invisible pathways that connect all things. Feel how the wind touches your face, how it seems to recognize you, to welcome you into this community of spirits and stories. Somewhere in the forest, a branch snaps under the weight of accumulated snow, and the sound travels clearly through the cold air. The Ainu understood that even such small events were communications from the spirit world, reminders that everything is alive, everything is aware. Everything participates in the ongoing conversation between the visible and invisible realms. Nothing happens by chance in this interconnected universe where every snowflake has its purpose, every breath of wind carries intention. As twilight deepens around you, the boundary between earth and sky becomes less certain. The snow-covered ground seems to glow with its own inner light, and the darkening sky takes on the deep blue-purple of sacred spaces. This is the time when the kamui are most active, when their voices can be heard most clearly by those who know how to listen with more than their ears. You find yourself beside a hot spring, steam rising in ghostly spirals that dissipate into the frigid air. The Ainu knew these thermal springs as gifts from the fire kamui, dwelling deep in the earth's belly, sharing their warmth with creatures who must endure the harsh northern winters. The water bubbles gently, a sound like quiet laughter, and you sense an invitation to rest, to soak not just your body but your very soul in this healing warmth that rises from the planet's core. Settling beside the spring, you feel the years melting away from your bones, the worries and tensions of modern life dissolving like snow in warm water. Here, in this timeless place, you begin to understand what the Ainu meant when they spoke of living in harmony with the kamui. It's not about worship in the way we typically understand it, but about recognition, about acknowledging the consciousness that permeates everything around us. The stars begin to appear overhead, pinpricks of light in the darkening dome of sky. Each constellation told the Ainu a different story, mapped the journeys of various kamui across the heavens, marked the proper times for hunting, fishing, gathering, celebrating. The North Star, steady and unwavering, was seen as the great center around which all other lights danced, the heart of the sky world from which wisdom flowed down to those who knew how to receive it. A owl hoots somewhere in the darkness, its call hollow and haunting, and you remember that this too is the voice of a kamui, the night-hunting deity who sees what daylight creatures cannot, who moves silently between the worlds of waking and dreaming. The sound seems to open doorways in your mind, pathways to understanding that rational thought alone could never access. The hot spring continues to bubble beside you, its warmth creating a small microclimate where ice cannot form, where certain hardy plants maintain their green throughout the long winter. This is a pocket of life, persisting in the midst of season's sleep, sustained by the generous fire spirits below. The Ainu would see in this a lesson about resilience, about finding the hidden sources of strength that allow consciousness to flourish even in the most challenging circumstances. As you sit in this sacred space, feeling the kamui presence all around you, time seems to slow and stretch like warm honey. Minutes become hours, become centuries, and you sense the deep continuity that connects this moment to all the moments that came before, to all the Ainu who sat beside springs like this one, listening to the same eternal conversations between earth and sky, fire and water, silence and song. The mountain spirits lean closer now, their attention focused and benevolent, sharing their perspective from the heights where snow never fully melts, where the view encompasses vast distances and countless lifetimes. You feel your own consciousness expanding, taking in more than your individual self usually contains, becoming momentarily part of something larger and more enduring than your personal story. The ocean spirits add their voices to this gathering, bringing the memory of depths where sunlight never reaches, but where different kinds of illumination flourish, where great currents carry the dreams of continents from one shore to another. Their song is vast and patient, measured in tides and seasons rather than heartbeats and breaths. And gradually, as you rest beside the healing spring with the kamui gathering around you like old friends sharing stories, you begin to drift towards sleep, knowing that your dreams tonight will be filled with the voices of mountain and sea, with the whispered wisdom of spirits who have never forgotten how to speak with the living world, who continue even now to offer their guidance to any who remember how to listen. The dream carries you forward now, like a gentle current that knows exactly where it needs to go. Time flows differently here, moving not in straight lines but in spirals that touch the past and future simultaneously. As the 21st century dawns over Hokkaido, something remarkable begins to stir in the hearts of those who carry Ainu blood in their veins, something that had been sleeping but never truly died. In a small apartment in Sapporo, a young woman named Akemi sits before her computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she searches for words that her grandmother whispered to her in childhood. These were sounds that carried the weight of centuries, syllables that held the memory of snow-covered forests and salmon runs, but they had been driven so deep into hiding that even their echoes seemed almost lost. Almost, but not quite. She types slowly, phonetically spelling out what she remembers. Iran Karapte, the Ainu greeting, meaning, "Allow me to gently touch your heart." As the letters appear on her screen, something awakens in her chest, a warmth that spreads outward like ripples on still water. She is not alone in this moment of recognition. Across Hokkaido, in Tokyo, in Osaka, others are having similar experiences, feeling the pull of ancestral voices calling them home to themselves. The government buildings in Tokyo, where for over a century policies of assimilation had sought to erase Ainu identity, now witness a different kind of gathering. In meeting rooms that once echoed with plans for cultural obliteration, new voices speak of recognition, of acknowledgement, of the long overdue honoring of Japan's indigenous people. The year 2008 brings a resolution that officially recognizes the Ainu as an indigenous people of Japan, words that carry healing power for those who had been told for generations that their culture was primitive, their language unnecessary, their traditions obsolete. Feel yourself drifting through the years that follow, watching as small miracles unfold, like flowers pushing through late spring snow. In universities across Japan, young scholars begin studying the Ainu language not as a dead relic, but as a living system of knowledge that holds keys to understanding the natural world in ways that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Their notebooks fill with verb forms that describe relationships between humans and nature so subtle that standard Japanese has no equivalents. A master carver named Takeshi, whose great-grandfather hid his Ainu identity to protect his family from discrimination, now teaches groups of eager students how to shape wood into the flowing patterns that represent the movement of water, the dance of wind through grass, the spiral paths that connect earth to sky. His hands, weathered by decades of patient craftsmanship, guide younger fingers in remembering motions that seemed lost forever, but were actually sleeping in genetic memory, waiting for the right moment to resurface. In a recording studio in Hokkaido, an elderly woman's voice trembles, not with age, but with emotion, as she sings traditional Ainu melodies that she learned from her mother in secret, late at night when no neighbors could hear and report them to authorities. Now these songs are being preserved digitally, their haunting beauty available to anyone who wishes to understand the musical language in which the Ainu communicated with the Kamui, the spirit deities of their sacred landscape. The ancient art of Tongkori music experiences its own renaissance. Young musicians discover that the 5-stringed instrument, resembling a small harp, produces sounds that seem to open doorways between worlds. As their fingers learn to pluck the strings in patterns passed down through generations, listeners report dreams filled with aurora lights dancing across northern skies, with the voices of ancestors carried on Arctic winds. Picture now the construction site where something unprecedented is taking shape. Near Lake Poroto, bulldozers and cranes work to build not another shopping center or apartment complex, but Upapoi, the National Ainu Museum and Park. This is ground that will become sacred space for cultural rebirth, where traditional architecture rises alongside modern exhibition halls, where the old ways and new technologies blend in service of memory and education. Children who had never heard Ainu words spoken aloud begin attending language immersion programs, their young voices wrapping around syllables that carry the essence of snow and salmon, of bear spirits and mountain prayers. Their pronunciation is imperfect at first, lacking the deep resonance that comes from being surrounded by the landscape that gave birth to the language, but their enthusiasm creates its own kind of authenticity, a bridge between what was lost and what might yet be recovered. Artists working in traditional mediums find their work displayed in galleries where it commands the respect once reserved for imported European masterpieces. The intricate embroidery patterns that Ainu women created on their robes, geometric designs that map the flow of rivers and the movement of seasonal spirits, inspire contemporary fashion designers who recognize in these ancient motifs a sophistication that speaks to universal principles of beauty and meaning. The practice of Ayomante, the bear ceremony that had been forbidden for decades, finds new expression in carefully orchestrated rituals that honor both traditional requirements and modern ethical sensitivities. Elders work with younger community members to adapt ancient practices for contemporary circumstances, ensuring that the spiritual essence remains intact while acknowledging changed relationships with the natural world. Food traditions resurface as Ainu restaurants begin appearing in major cities, serving dishes that reconnect urban Japanese with flavors their island ancestors knew intimately. Wild vegetables gathered according to traditional knowledge, salmon prepared using smoking techniques perfected over centuries, fermented preserves that sustained communities through harsh winters, all find new appreciation among people hungry for authentic connections to their land's deeper history. The internet, that most modern of technologies, becomes an unexpected ally in cultural preservation. Online communities form where people with even the smallest fraction of Ainu ancestry can connect, share family stories, compare fragments of remembered songs and sayings. Forums buzz with discussions about traditional hunting techniques, the proper timing for gathering medicinal plants, the symbolic meanings embedded in textile patterns. University researchers collaborate with community elders to create comprehensive databases of Ainu oral traditions, their academic methods guided by Indigenous protocols for handling sacred knowledge. The result is scholarship that serves the community rather than extracting from it, research that strengthens cultural continuity rather than treating it as a subject for outside analysis. As you drift deeper into this awakening dream, you sense the profound healing that occurs when a people begin to remember who they are. It's not simply nostalgia for a lost past, but something more dynamic and forward-looking. A reclamation of identity that empowers new forms of creativity and resistance. Young Ainu activists, educated in both traditional knowledge and contemporary political strategies, speak at international forums about indigenous rights, climate change, and the importance of maintaining diverse ways of understanding humanity's relationship with the natural world. Their voices carry not just personal stories, but the accumulated wisdom of ancestors who learned to thrive in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The traditional crafts that had nearly disappeared begin appearing in international markets, not as exotic curiosities, but as examples of sophisticated design, thinking that addresses contemporary concerns about sustainability and environmental harmony. Customers around the world purchase these items not just for their beauty, but for their connection to ways of living that offer alternatives to purely extractive relationships with nature. As this chapter of awakening unfolds around you, you feel yourself becoming part of the story, connected to the great healing that occurs when communities reclaim their authentic voices after periods of enforced silence. The recovery is not complete, may never be complete, but something essential has been saved, something precious has been returned to the world. The Kamui, those spirit deities who never abandoned their posts in mountains and rivers, in forests and coastal waters, seem to respond to this renewed recognition with their own form of blessing. The natural world of Hokkaido appears more vibrant to those who approach it with traditional understanding, more willing to share its secrets with people who remember how to ask respectfully for what they need. And as you rest now in this space between sleeping and waking, between forgetting and remembering, you carry with you the knowledge that cultures can indeed rise from near extinction, that languages can be learned again, that traditions can find new expressions while maintaining their essential spirits, that the voices of indigenous peoples contain wisdom our modern world desperately needs to hear. The journey we have taken together is drawing to its gentle close now, like a river that has carried us through many landscapes, finally approaching the peaceful embrace of the sea. Feel yourself beginning to surface from the depths of this ancient story. But do not hurry. Do not rush this transition back to your own time and place. Let the return happen as naturally as dawn breaking over snow-covered mountains, as gradually as spring returning to the northern forests after winter's long sleep. You have walked with the Ainu people through their sacred landscape, have listened to the whispers of Kamui in the wind and water, have witnessed both the great forgetting and the miraculous remembering that marks their story. These images and voices travel with you now, settling into that quiet place in your heart where all meaningful stories take root and grow into wisdom. The snow still falls gently in your mind's eye, each flake unique and purposeful, adding to the great silence that holds all sounds. The hot springs still bubble with ancient warmth, the mountains still stand in their patient majesty, the ocean still sings its eternal songs. But now you understand that these are not merely features of a distant landscape, not simply elements of someone else's story. They are reminders of the sacred nature of all places, all peoples, all the quiet voices that speak to us when we remember how to listen. As you rest here in this liminal space between the Ainu world and your own, notice how the boundaries between past and present have become more permeable. The wisdom of indigenous peoples does not belong only to history books or museum displays. It lives wherever someone chooses to honor the consciousness present in nature, wherever someone recognizes that human beings are not separate from the web of life, but intimately woven into its patterns. The Ainu greeting Iran Karapte lingers in the air around you, its meaning rippling outward like circles on still water. Allow me to gently touch your heart. This was not simply a way of saying hello. but a recognition of the sacred vulnerability we share when we truly meet one another, when we acknowledge the spirit presence that animates every living being. In your own daily encounters, you carry now the possibility of such gentle recognition. The elders who kept stories alive through years of silence, who whispered prayers in forbidden languages, who maintained ceremonies in hidden places, they offer you a gift that transcends cultural boundaries. They show you that what matters most can survive the harshest conditions if even one person holds it sacred in their heart. In your own life, what treasures do you carry that deserve such careful tending? What wisdom have you inherited that might, through your faithful attention, survive to bless future generations? The young people learning to speak Ainu words for the first time, their tongues struggling with sounds their grandparents knew as naturally as breathing. They remind you that it is never too late for renaissance, never too late for recovery. The languages we have forgotten, the connections we have severed, the parts of ourselves we thought were lost forever. They wait patiently for the moment when we turn back toward them with love and determination. The Kamui continue their eternal presence in the natural world, whether humans remember to acknowledge them or not. The mountain spirits maintain their watch, the river spirits flow toward the sea, the forest spirits rustle in every breeze. They do not demand recognition, but they respond with generous blessing when recognition is offered. In your own relationship with the places you inhabit, you now carry an invitation to deeper communion, to the kind of reciprocal awareness that transforms everyday environments into sacred landscapes. As consciousness begins to gather itself back into the boundaries of your individual self, you find that those boundaries are somehow more spacious than before, more permeable to the beauty and wisdom that surrounds you. The story of the Ainu has become part of your story now, their resilience a resource you can draw upon, their spiritual understanding a lens through which you can see your own world with fresh eyes. Let yourself become aware once again of your own breathing, but notice how it now carries the rhythm of ancient songs, the patience of mountain time, the flowing continuity of river wisdom. Your body lies in its familiar place, but it rests now in the knowledge that it is part of a vast community of embodied spirits, connected through countless invisible threads to all life on this planet. The room around you remains the same, yet something has shifted in your relationship to it. The walls hold not just your personal space, but the echo of all dwellings where humans have sought shelter and warmth. The darkness beyond your windows contains not emptiness, but the pregnant silence in which new possibilities are always gestating. Every ordinary object becomes a reminder of the hands that made it, the materials that gave themselves to its creation, the intricate web of relationships that brought it into your life. As sleep approaches now with the gentleness of snow settling on water, you carry with you a deeper understanding of what it means to be human in relationship with the living world. You have learned from the Ainu that cultures can die and be reborn, that languages can return from the edge of extinction, that traditional ways of knowing hold keys to wisdom our modern world desperately needs. The whispers of the Ainu continue in the space between waking and sleeping, not as voices from the past, but as living guidance for the future. They remind you that every moment offers opportunities for greater reverence, deeper listening, more generous reciprocity with the world that sustains you. They invite you to be an ancestor that future generations will thank, someone who helped preserve what is precious, who chose love over fear, connection over separation. In your dreams tonight, you may find yourself walking again through snow-covered forests where every tree holds a story, beside rivers where the water carries prayers, under skies where the aurora dances with the voices of those who have gone before. You may hear the tonkori strings singing across vast distances, carrying messages of hope and healing to all who need encouragement for their own journeys of remembering and return. And when you wake in the morning, you will carry with you the gift the Ainu people offer to our troubled world, the knowledge that harmony is possible, that humans and nature can live in respectful partnership, that indigenous wisdom holds medicines our contemporary souls urgently need, that cultures thought lost can flower again when tended with love and determination. Rest now in the peace of knowing that this story continues, that somewhere in Hokkaido, the Kamui still watch over the land, that young voices are learning ancient songs, that the great work of healing and recovery unfolds in countless small acts of remembrance and reverence. Rest in the certainty that your own life participates in this larger story of awakening, that your choices matter, that your reverence makes a difference in the great conversation between human hearts and the living world. Sleep well and dream of snow and salmon, of hot springs and mountain spirits, of voices that refuse to be silenced, of love that persists through every season of forgetting and remembering. The Ainu ancestors send you blessings for your own journey home to the sacred understanding that has never really left you, only waited patiently for your return.